All right. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Joel Kirshner. I'm with the University of Kansas. This is a Birds of the Feather discussion, and I'm going to start with some of the lessons we learned from a recent RFP project. And as an analyst, I don't have an opportunity to follow one of these through at least to the detail we did this time. And so this is an exploration for me, but it's also an opportunity for us to talk about it as a community as far as finding the best ways to do this kind of thing. So this has been kind of long running. Like the last talk we had, they were talking about, oh, we only had like a month. And I'm just like, wow, that's not a lot of time to do a big project like this. In this case, we had an opportunity. It was a golden opportunity. And what we wanted to accomplish was to implement a security, information, and event management system. A SIEM is basically a big database, but more importantly, it follows a very specific process for ingesting information and then ultimately turning it into actionable information. So one of the things that I wanted to cover is in kind of broad strokes. This project we had, I'm going to go over an overview, then we're going to talk about some of the phases, and then I'll talk about our experiences with the actual proof of concept testing, and then we'll go through the whole project life cycle and kind of my takeaways from that. So for this project, we had actually had kind of a actual project cycle. So usually, whenever I've been involved with purchasing projects, it's just been we need this product, and so we go through and we say, okay, these vendors handle it. We have a little bit of a song and dance for the vendors, and then eventually we say, oh, wait, we want these guys, and then magic happens, and then it shows up or it doesn't. And this is different because this is actually a fairly high-ticket item, and there's two aspects to that. One, we have to come to the decision on, do we want it to be a locally hosted product? And two, do we want a cloud product? And both of those have very different funding sources. And the funding source we have, it might pay for a lot up front, but it may not necessarily be a part of our budget going into the future. So there's going to be another conversation in the background about, can we get additional funding to maintain this product? For actually evaluating the different vendor products against each other, so we went through that, and so we had a lot of pain points in that process of actually comparing what turned out to be oranges and pears, not apples. We thought we were trying to, get apples to apples. Hey, let's everybody, bring a SIEM to the table and let's compare them. But there were very different products that we saw. And then the actual proof of concept, a lot of that was getting to that point, and then we had started with such a broad landscape, and we had to really condense that down. So when we were testing it, we needed to test these products against each other in a very similar way so we could effectively line them up side by side and say which one worked best. And so that had a lot of takeaways too. So long story short, and I'm just going to go through a lot of this, and then I think the most important takeaway you can get out of this is the conversation we're going to have together. So this part here, we started about last year, about this time, and we knew that we had some funding that we could use towards this. But it was a question of just getting the process started. And it was a rocky road because we didn't really know if we were going to get that funding or not. Then we went to kind of a selection. And so once we had an idea of what, that this was going to happen, we had to get the vendors and we had to get them to fill out a questionnaire. And in that process, so let's see here. In that process, we needed to narrow that list down because we couldn't evaluate 10 or 12 vendors. That just wasn't going to happen. We couldn't, there just isn't enough time to actually compare, 12 vendors side by side. We had to narrow the course. So in the process of them answering a questionnaire and the process of us getting kind of a rough idea of what the costs were and all that kind of stuff, we were able to narrow that list from, down to about 3 vendors. So, like I said earlier, oranges and pears. Now, we wanted to get an apples-to-apples thing. So we had to sit there and figure out what are the core things do we need this to do. That also helped kind of narrow down which vendors we selected. But as a part of this exercise, and the thing that I enjoyed the most is that it forced me to sit down and actually define what this beast was. Everybody says it's an acronym, Security, Information, and Event Management. But what does that really mean? Our insurance questionnaire and our insurance provider wants us to have a SIM, but nobody really gets down and talks about what is a SIM, what key features make up a SIM. It's always talked about in very broad terms, and so this process really forced us to define what that means to us. And there just isn't a lot of documentation out there, at least that I found that clearly stated what features we wanted to look for. I know that the SANS Institute had some documentation about evaluating next-gen SIMs, but it was really in the weeds. It didn't, when you're trying to compare products, you're trying to do so using, it becomes mathematically difficult if you have more than a handful of criteria. So you're taking this veritable ocean of criteria, and then you need to condense that down, and so that was one of the big takeaways. Another process of this is that because we were going through formal project management, this was the first time that we've really gone through and had a very detailed, very controlled project around this. And so this is a new experience to me. And so I look forward to your experiences and your feedback on kind of what you've seen in your environments when you were going through either large projects to accomplish something or large projects to purchase something. So like I said, we came down to about 3 different finalists. One of the things we had to do once we had defined the finalists, we had to come up with the actual proof of concept. And part of that is that we needed to sit down and figure out, all right, what data sources do we want them to try to ingest? What do we want to accomplish with this tool? And so that was a very important takeaway for me, is that we had to try to come up with a scenario that would work with these 3 vendors. The vendors, we came to realize some of them couldn't do some of those scenarios. What we had originally asked for, what SIM meant to them, was very different from what SIM meant to us. So we had to sit there and adjust as the proof of concept session went through, is we had to adjust that and try to see if there's ways that we could move forward and see if that product could potentially fit the bill with the constraints that they have. So like in one vendor's case, it could do everything that we were originally wanting, but it would be an add-on charge. Or we'd have to come up with a very roundabout hack on it to come up with the same type of features that we were looking for. So the way we divided up the proof of concepts is that we had one person on the team because the vendors, we had some expertise already on the team on each of them. We had people that, we had one person that was really good with, one vendor. We had another person who was adjacent to, desktop support, desktop EDR, and so they were able to figure out the other vendor and work with them, and then the assistant CISO, deputy CISO actually took the third one because they were kind of an outlier to begin with. And so each person kind of took the lead on those projects. And we worked within the data that we can get out of our environment. The vendors, when they do their initial song and dance, they'll give you canned data. And so it's data that's already, they intend to be interesting. It's already well-defined. It already has high fidelity. It gives you lots of bells, beeps, and whistles, lots of charts, and that kind of stuff. It shows you what that product can look like, but ultimately, this product is more about process. So we're looking at the outcome, but we don't necessarily know how they got there. And that's a key thing about the POC is that when you try it, yes, you may want to do cloud hosting and let them kind of control the environment and set up, but you need to use your own data because ultimately that's going to show you what it can look like in your environment. So in our case, we had, we tried to select data sources from that would require different methods to get access to that data. So syslog being one source, a API interface, API interfaces for being some of the other sources, and then we had an internal system that didn't have any good telemetry coming from it. And so we wanted to see how they dealt with ingesting that data, how could we get access to it. And then a lot of the vendors had pre-built ingestion engines. Some of them worked great. Other ones, even if they didn't work, it was open for us to change it. We could create our own. There wasn't any blockages there. And then other vendors, you had a very small library of ingestion sources, and you didn't have that ability to change them or modify them or add stuff. And so that was, as I said, the important part here is that you're talking about a process. The process will give you that data that will generate all the neat dashboards and charts and alerts and all that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of the takeaway of our proof of concept. So I mentioned using your data. And so in our case, we selected MFA logs, firewall IPS logs, not traffic, endpoint protection logs, Azure AD identity logs, and VPN logs. We also had a handful of other ones that we tried to substitute with if one didn't work well. And from that, each of those tells a very unique story. And so when you're choosing information to go into a SIEM ultimately is going to make a story for you. And that story is going to end in you performing an action or having an action performed on your behalf through automation or something like that. So when you feed information into a SIEM, if you're just trucking in information and you're not careful about it, you're going to get a lot of junky answers. You're going to get a very convoluted story. And so ingestion is a key part of this process. A SIEM has kind of two phases to it. The one that you're probably most familiar with is storing logs. So everybody sets up syslog, everybody sets up Windows event logs, whatever, and they go to one place. And then if there's a problem sometime down the line, you go there and you try to sort through it. So whether it's through log analytics, whether it's through syslog, whether it's using the grep utility inside of a Linux box, something like that, you're going through a fairly unformatted data file and trying to dredge up information after the fact. It's difficult to do. But then there's a next phase to that. So if you go through and do a little bit of cleanup on those logs, extract out field names, enrich it a little bit. I know that Microsoft Log Analytics does a pretty decent job of that. Then it becomes a lot easier to find stuff. You can run more complex searches. But that doesn't really tell a story. You're still sifting through a needle, looking for the needle in the haystack. The next level is you want to turn that into an event. An event is, like I said, a story. It just says this situation happened. It's a more human-readable part of the telemetry. This person logged in at this time. That's not something you can easily tell out of just a flat, text file, because you don't know where the field names are. It's hard to search. You have to go through lots of regular expressions to get that information out. And so if you can turn that into a clear story, that's when you get into event management. And then the last phase is where you take the most notable of those events and you turn that into action. And that can be in different forms. That can be dashboards, it can be alerts, it can be automations. But a SIM should do each of these steps. It starts with raw data, you enrich it, you transform it, you turn it into a story, and ultimately that story leads to action. And so when we're evaluating the vendors, that's what we're trying to do. We're looking at the ability to execute each of these steps. Some takeaways. Pay attention to the data. Is it the field names? We saw a lot of variation. So one product, it was a very haphazard environment. So they had a zillion and one plugins, and we could pull in just about everything in our environment, but when we pulled those in, the field names were all different. So username would be spelled differently, depending on the log source. So the way that particular SIM worked, you could transform each of those sources, and you can, kind of like how you can with Microsoft SQL or SQL database, where you can take multiple sources, transform the field names, and make it, lay it out the way you want. But with this, you had, why do you want to go through and do that? It should just be normalized. You should have, there shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to transform the field names of my identity logs so that I can run a query against my Microsoft identity logs. That just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So look for that. With the databases, like your standard SQL databases, when you're feeding it data, it wants it to be formatted. It wants it to be well formatted when you ingest. So a NoSQL database doesn't really care. You're just shoveling data into it. And that limits its ability to do transformations, it limits its ability to do searches and that kind of stuff. But if you're just needing to shovel in dirty data very quickly, a NoSQL database will do the job. The trouble is that it limits your ability to search for data, to present it, to transform it. So when you're evaluating a SIM, basically it's a database. So take a look on how the underlying guts of the database work. Let's see here. Transformation, we talked about that as kind of a workaround for that. So if you have messy data coming in, are you able to transform it at search time? So like some query languages have a piping query language system where you're going through and taking, okay, first search for everything, now transform it this way, now transform it so that these field names are set differently, and pipe. And so there's a couple different ones out there. What was it? Pipe query language, I know the KQL. So take a look at the actual search language and see if you have flexibility to work with dirty data. Otherwise, if it can't, you got to work extra hard and make sure that that data, as you ingest it, is clean. So during the process, we had to actually sit down and try to compare apples and oranges and pears. And this was kind of difficult because when we first looked at, when we had all the vendors come in and give us, we had this 200 question questionnaire. That's way too much. And the way it was formatted, we couldn't really do categories, or at least it wasn't well designed on kind of what we should cover. Ultimately, I think I sat down and, I'm going to page ahead here a little bit. Because I have something that covers that. Here we go. So I wanted to, we needed a way to, later on, because we went through that whole mess. We had a multi-hundred questionnaire, and we were trying to actually, and like 30% of that were like short answer. So that's not something you can quickly just go through and say, well, this has more questions right than the rest of them. You have some kind of analysis you have to do on those questions that they answered. And so that was really a mess. If I were to go through and do that again, I would go through and reduce that down into categories, and then I'd have questions related to that category. Also, the way we did the questionnaire, because we were in a little bit of a time crunch for that phase, we had to break it up between all the people participating, and so each person came up with what they thought they had, but we had a lot of overlap and duplication, which also led to it being kind of expansive. So after we completed the POC, I didn't want to do that again. So for the most part, we had controlled environments, controlled situations that we were, specific problems that we're trying to solve. So that helped. We needed to reduce it down to something that we could compare. So we reduced it down using the data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. I mean, the construct itself, there isn't it's been used a lot, but the important part is that it nicely covers all the processes that we have to achieve in order for it to be a good product. We have to have the ability to ingest any type of raw data. We have to have the ability to transform that data into something searchable. We have to have the ability to transform that formatted data now into events, and then we have to be able to select which events are most applicable and that need action. So, all right. I mentioned earlier the type of funding you have available kind of determines the type of product you can get. A lot of times when you get, the state gives you a big lump of money, that's the only lump of money they're going to give you. They're not going to give you in addition to your budget. You can do fun tricks with that lump of money to make it look like it's part of your budget, but ultimately, you want to select something that you don't have to pay for over and over again. What that lump of money is good for is the initial setup. All the care and feeding, all the initial setup, all the time it takes to ingest data sets, all the time it takes to normalize and actually go through the process of getting that data, turning it into something actionable. That's what that lump of money can be good for. But actually maintaining it is also an important question. How are you going to pay for this product? Because usually you're going to be either paying some type of support contract or you're actually going to be paying for some type of cloud service. And in all these cases, I know that one vendor had good solutions for being a CapEx product, a capital expenditure product. And they had tricks you could do where you can take that lump sum and actually stretch it over time. But there would also have to be, you'd still have to have the conversation in the background with, the organization, which is, we need X many, tens of thousands of dollars to continue to use this product over time. So that's something that we had the discussion on, and thankfully we were able to pull that off, where we had funding, we're going to be able to purchase this product, and we've had the budget added to allow us to continue to use it. Hardware is expensive and getting more expensive. So if you're talking about capital expenditure, if you're hosting it on campus, it's a database, it needs fast storage, it needs lots of compute, lots of memory, and all that has become exorbitantly more expensive these days. And so cloud services becomes more and more attractive. So that's a decision you have to make, and this is for any type of compute product. In this situation, this is something you're going to run into no matter what, even if it's not a SIM. So, I think we realized earlier on that we generate way more data than we could ever put into this product. And a lot of these services, they charge you either on your computation or they'll charge you on the amount of data you're ingesting. And that's something that's really critical to realize, is that the first knee-jerk reaction, even on vendors, is to turn on all the data spouts and show you all the bells, beeps, and whistles. But ultimately, you don't want to do that. What you want to do is start taking the data in your environment that tells a story, that can tell a story. It doesn't have to be very much. And in order to do that cost effectively, you need to have methods of filtering that information going into the system. And so that's another key thing that we found that we, looking at vendors, is that do they have the capability to filter? All right. So ultimately, we were able to reduce it down to 4 criteria. We were able to use weighting, so that if there was one specific set of criteria that was more important than the others, then we could add additional weight to it, so that a vendor that might do well on topics we don't care about and do poorly on things that we do, we can potentially have a means of playing with the numbers so that we can get the right product for us. So that was, I think, an important takeaway. But the thing I would like to hear about from people is selection criteria, multi-criteria selection. One method that's been shown to me is the AHP spreadsheet tool, and that's something I've used in the class, but I'd be interested to hear your experiences on how to compare and contrast things. Some of the vendors were irresponsible. We came to them and we told them, and we were testing in our production, and we were getting information from our production and testing with it. But that was a takeaway, because we had one vendor that we said, okay, we don't want you to use data sources that are going to generate costs for us. And they swore up and down they wouldn't do that. They did exactly that. And ultimately, we went back through and kind of researched what the deal was, is that I don't think they knew what they were doing. They were just turning on all the spigots and assuming that it was going to work, and it didn't. What it did is that it created large costs for us. Thankfully, they went back through and paid us for it, but it was a very costly mistake, and we told them. So don't be tolerant of vendors that don't listen to you. If they try to ramrod you into solutions, if they try to force you into some type of managed arrangement that you don't want to do, just don't tolerate that. So I'm going to start with a roundtable discussion, and I'd like you all to get closer here so we can kind of hear each other talk and speak amongst each other. And I'm going to start with some food for thought here. Come on. let's get some audience participation here, because the value is that we get to share each other's experiences here. Come on. So I'll pass the mic around here. Actually, I have a spare one right here. So how tolerant are the teams that you need to interact with of outages? Can you spare the people to keep these systems running? So if you have a big system that you're planning for, it's going to have a lot of moving parts. Do you have the people on staff to maintain it? And any project that you've run into. So I'll just pass the mic around here.
I'll say something for you. So this is something that I've been on a few different projects where it's been a problem. People don't understand. You talked about CapEx versus OpEx. And so not only are you paying for the software, but like when I worked at a bank, we had an internal ticket system we'd created. They wanted to go to ServiceNow. And we kept trying to tell them, besides paying ServiceNow, you're going to be paying for 2 or 3 FTEs minimum to keep ServiceNow running. So you have to like build that in and think about that. Like just because you have a vendor, that's not the stopping point of we're done now.
I guess on the first point, one of the things that we've done with our systems is basically assign a tier rating to it. Like, is this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and along those points, what happens if there is an outage and what is the SLA? And for a product, for some of our tier 1 products, where when we're making the decision as far as is it on-prem or in cloud, well, if this is a critical system, the SLA on it has to be very high, so then the cost goes much higher as a part of that, which also needs to be budgeted into that.
No, I'm not high enough.
I was just at the earlier session in this room on team dynamics, and we're going to that at Washburn, and we're going to be putting in SLAs, and that will be something we'll be looking at to be able to do exactly what you're talking about, because to be able to have some of that impact there when an agreement.
So following up on that, has anybody been in kind of the purchasing project meetings, and has that been brought up? I know you indicated it has.
Yeah, I guess one of the things we look at, one of the first questions is, what's the budget? Because if from the get-go is kind of what is the total cost of ownership of this over whatever time period? Because one of the recent purchase where this is one of the most expensive things that we have purchased as an institution, and we know everyone says that, yes, this is going to be an expensive thing to purchase, and we're going to purchase it for a 5-year plan. All right, 5 years from now, what are we going to do? Because the costs are only going to go up. So are we actually going to say that on year 6, when it's time to renew, what does our budget look like now? Because of course, what is going to be the long-term budget on that? And then we kind of let that drive part of the selection, because if we know that this isn't going to be necessarily a long-term thing, well, then we can change some of the options as far as how critical is this versus no, we know we're going to need this for a long time. Well, then either we need to find bigger pockets or rescope what the project actually is.
No, I was just going to say, on the budget-wise, the thing we run into is the upper management, because previous company, we like to be in control, so we want an on-prem solution rather than a cloud solution, but of course the on-prem is a lot more expensive than the cloud, and then we have to justify to our executives, why are you spending 70 or 100K on stuff that's just going to generate logs? They can't see the bigger picture of why you need it, so it's one of those, brick walls we run into, so.
All right, next, see here, training. So ultimately, we're going to be involving other people into these projects. A SIM ultimately isn't just for our security team. It's to pull together all parts of IT and potentially different stakeholders throughout the KU community. And in order to make that happen, we have to have training. And so has that been something that you've seen where we got the widget, it looks great, it works great for one department, unfortunately nobody else wants to touch it because they don't know what it is?
I'll give a comment on that. So my team at University of Kansas, we bought a product and we made sure it came with vendor-provided training. So what we've been doing is, if you want access to this product, which is optional but recommended, there's like 4 vendor-provided modules, and we require 2 of them. And so you submit proof that you've done 2 of those modules, we turn on your access. And so that works well for something that people don't have to use. But if it was something we were going to require people to use, then I think then that's a little bit more of a question of how do you like sell people on getting into this, because they might just feel like, people are just shoving it down my throat. So.
So would that be part of the purchasing process to get additional stakeholders' opinions into the?
Well, or figure out, does like a training module come with it, and is that module going to meet your needs, or are you still going to need to have some program or deployment beyond just what the vendor's giving you? Yeah.
Has anybody had a product or process that they've done, a large project, where they had to pull in different stakeholders into that process, into the purchasing process? No. All right. So one of the frustrations for information security is that a lot of the things we need access in different platforms requires admin privileges. And a lot of times these network products, they are not centrally managed. So it's a question of, we've given out admin privileges, how do we reel them back? Any takeaways on that? I mean, I imagine that kind of flows into all kinds of different situations. Let's see here. One of the things for SIM is about data retention. So we might have requirements from the state or government or through contracts that we maintain, that we hold certain types of log data for a certain amount of time. And the amount of that data makes that extraordinarily difficult. Plus, the tools we have may make that difficult. So that was my takeaway of this situation, was that I wanted to keep track of the ability to control how much and for how long data we got. We're getting low on time here, so I'll skip ahead here a little bit. What are the drivers in your respective environments for these types of tools, for SIM, for log management, for any type of database auditing?
We went with Arctic Wolf to do something similar, not exactly as
Okay.
SIM, but we did it just compliance, be able to security, watch those logs, watch what's happening. We were able to use state funding in order to buy it for 3 years, and that's another one conversation. What's going to happen after that 3rd year? I think our president, leadership, they've seen benefits from it because it's seen some things, events happen that we've been able to escalate to them about compromised accounts in other countries, that sort of thing. So I think we'll get the funding there here in next year, 27, when we need to do that. So it's been just compliance and being able to do that, and of course that helps as we talk to insurance and that we have these and those things in place.
Thank you. All right. Oh,
I'll throw one out as far as just capability, where someone higher up says, hey, we want this type of report, we want this type of data, and we say, well, we don't have the things, whatever thing it is to do that, and this is what it would cost to do that. And so then they make a decision. Do I want to spend this to have this capability? Sometimes yes, sometimes, well, actually, we really don't need that capability. So,
yeah, the costs do add up. Final question here. Now, I know I've kind of skipped over a lot of complicated things. Project management we talked about. We talked about security information and all that. Is there any particular questions you have on this, or is there something in your environment that you had questions on that any questions I could answer? Unfortunately, we're not done yet. So it started about this time last year. We have one that we're in negotiations with. So we have made a selection. And I'll be happy to share that once I'm certain that I can share that. But in this case, we went with kind of the dark horse candidate. It was a new vendor in the market, and they just happened to be able to tick off most of the boxes we need. And it also helped that one of the other competitors wasn't behaving well. So that made things a little bit easier for our selection process. That being said, that's all I got. I appreciate your patience and your feedback, and everybody have a terrific day.